Hello, this is Joe Folkman, and welcome to our webinar, Powered by Data, Designed for Leaders. This is a webinar where we're going to talk about these 33 insights, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Jack Zenger. Jack, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Joe.
Let's talk about 33 insights in our new book, The New Extraordinary Leader. We're going to talk about some of the insights. We came up with 33 insights in our new book. And we did a previous podcast where we talked about a few of these, but I wanted to dig into the data. I wanted to, and at first John said, "What should we call this?" And I said, a geek's view of the results. I don't know, but so today we're going to dig into the data. We're going to show you a lot of the analysis we've done to come up with these insights and reinforce some of the insights. And I have to say, we learned a lot by continuing to look at the data, and we even, changed some of our opinions from the first time. Let's talk about insight number one. Great leaders make a great difference. Now, the graph you're seeing there shows leadership effectiveness. We measure leadership effectiveness by doing 360 assessments, using the aggregate of that 360, and putting all of the competencies together, 19 competencies. We cluster them together into one variable we called overall leadership effectiveness. So it's really the assessment of 60 items and that measures your effectiveness. And that's the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is the percentage of employees willing to go the extra mile. And the geek would say that is discretionary effort, right, Jack?
Right.
In other words, every employee when they come to work makes a decision, am I going to do the minimum amount of work possible to keep my job, a little bit more than that, or am I going to give you all my energy and effort? And this is the percentage of people that are willing to do more.
And what's fascinating to me, Joe, about this is that it starts out as you're looking at all those, not deciles. They're every 5%.
Fifth dials, or 5,000. I don't know.
Half deciles.
Yeah.
But it goes, a 2% gain, then a 3% gain, then a 5% gain, and then finally it jumps to a 16% percentile gain, and it just talks about the power of really effective leaders.
And that's amazing to me that you get. I mean, if you're really, really good, and I do this really mean thing sometimes when I'm with groups, and I ask them this question on our polling. I say, does your organization need good leaders? And everybody goes, yes. And then I say, I disagree. And this is why I disagree. Yeah. You don't need good leaders. Good leaders get you 29% of your employees. But great leaders, those at the top 5%, 76% of your employees willing to work harder, do more, stay up all night. That's amazing. The second insight was one organization can have many great leaders. And this is a new chart we did. We have an organization we worked with for a long time. And we started off in 2004, and we looked at the percentage of great leaders they had. They had 9.6%, which is about what we'd expect.
And our definition of great leaders is people who are at the 90th percentile on the overall score.
Yeah. Well, in 2009, we measured them again, and they only went up to 0.2%. But what happened is that people would go through the extraordinary leader, and then 2 years later, they'd do it again. 2 years later, do it again, or 3 years later, they do it again. So in this organization, they were very good about having people go back through. And in 2011-12, we pop up to 13, and then 13-14, 18, and in 17-18, we're at 21%.
So it doubled.
Yeah. And
more than doubled.
And 1 out of 5 of leaders in this organization are at the 90th percentile. That's amazing.
That is right.
And what it says is you can really change the mixture of leadership in that organization, and leadership are going to affect outcomes. Anything else on that, Jack?
No.
Okay. So the next thing is about improved leadership leads to performance outcomes. And a lot of people do leadership effectiveness, and their point is, hey, we're going to make these people nicer, better, friendlier. That's good. But at the end of the day, What we believe is better leaders mean better results. And this is a study we did in Mexico with a client that had stores that service the poorest people in the country. And in these stores, we measured the leadership effectiveness of the store managers, and then we looked at the percentage growth in year-to-year sales. And what we found is the worst leaders had about a 0.7 increase in sales. Best leaders have 7.4% increase in sales versus the prior year. And then when we looked at how that happened, we looked at turnover. And again, the bottom third of the leaders have 81% turnover. The top third of the leaders have 68% turnover. And they were, fewer people were quitting. They had better sales. The point here is better leaders, better results, and it's the outcomes. I keep saying, I think leadership effectiveness doesn't cost anything, because when you look at the value it creates, it much exceeds the cost of doing it.
Well, I know you could have added more slides here. We could have done one on customer satisfaction. We could have done one on profitability, and this list goes on, doesn't it? I mean, it's just endless.
And for all those who are looking for more, I want to do more studies. Please sign up. I was in Australia last week, and I found an organization, and they were excited about doing it. So we hopefully will get it. Anyway, third, and we're not going to give you every insight because we couldn't make this a 3-hour webinar. But insight 7: some competencies differentiate extraordinary leaders. In our original research, we did a study with 20,000 leaders, 200,000 assessments, and what we did was we looked at the best leaders and we looked at the worst leaders, and we looked at thousands of items, and looked at which items, if we looked at best and worst leaders, had a bigger difference or made a bigger difference, and we called those differentiating items. We updated that study a couple of years ago, and this time instead of 20,000 leaders, we had 121,000 leaders. We had 2,651 items. We had 1,500,000 assessments. So we got a lot bigger database now. But to kind of give you an example of what we found with these differentiated items, we had an item, and it was like, is on time to meetings. And we actually found that the worst leaders scored better than the best leaders on it, which is really interesting. But that's not a differentiating item because it didn't follow but when we looked at an item like, does everything possible to reach goals, we saw this huge stretch. And that huge stretch is really how we created our standard assessments, and what we use in a lot of our assessments is these differentiating items. And what they do is they predict leaders much more effectively than most items. And by the way, I couldn't tell by looking at an item which one was differentiating. I only could tell when I looked at the data. And what this analysis led us to was we updated our competency model. Our original model was 16 competencies. We now have 19 competencies. We added 3 competencies, and we changed a couple. We changed practice of self-development to learning agility. We broadened that a little bit, added an item, and we changed dealing with the outside world to customer and external focus. And then we added these 3 competencies: makes decisions, takes risks, and values diversity. And those, we found that when we did the analysis, those popped up as additional differentiating competencies.
I think it's useful to note here, too, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but notice that these are very consistent across all cultures, in all situations, all levels. These are very fundamental management behaviors that hold true in a very wide variety of situations.
We've been incredibly impressed with how valid our survey is in different cultures and countries. And Jack, you've written a bunch of articles on it.
I'm very adamant about this subject because, as you saw, the 19 that we've listed really are consistent across all cultures in many different situations. The people who argue that strengths taken too far become a weakness used as their examples something like assertiveness or enabling behavior. And I would be the first to admit that a certain dose of assertiveness is helpful and that too much is not helpful. but assertiveness is not a strength.
Yeah.
And no one has ever kind of, looked at the research. And so you're about to show, I think, what really happens when you have real strengths.
Well, and again, the theory is if you were really good at something, you might have a downside. And so what we did is we looked at champions change and we looked at its impact on employee engagement. And as you go up and you start at the first percentile and you have, 31% of the employees are highly engaged. Well, what we're looking at here is this engagement percentile, and we get up to the 91st to the 95th percentile. They're at the 68th percentile. Now, again, if a strength pushed too far has a negative effect, we'd expect that that's going to go down. I mean that you're going to get some, it's like you're pushing that too far. But what we get is it keeps going up, and it does that with every competency.
I was going to say the point we'd like to convey is that every competency that we've listed as our differentiating competencies always get better the higher the score.
And we just don't find any downside. And so we don't believe in this philosophy that a strength, too good of a strength hurts you.
A strength goes too far. Yeah.
Probably one of our most significant insights that we had was this idea of building strengths. And I remember Jack and I were goofing off. We weren't goofing off. We were working hard. But we were in his office, and Jack said, I wonder what would happen if people were really good at something. And I said, whoa, this is 20 years ago. And I said, I've never looked at that. And so we looked at it. And when we looked at it, we found that if people had no strengths, they were at the 34th percentile. If they had one strength, they moved to the 64th percentile. 3 strengths put them at the 81st percentile. And that would just blew us away. It blew us away, and it changed the way we did leadership development. We switched from telling people to figure out what was wrong with them to try and find something they could be really great at unless they had a fatal flaw. Well, since that time, we've been all over the world. We have 25 distributors that work with us, and we've assessed this issue of strengths, this impact of strengths all over the world. What we're showing you here is the impact of strengths all over the globe, and what you can see is, hey, it's true.
Very consistent from every culture and every continent.
It really is.
It's very consistent.
It's really amazing. Another thing that we loved was something we called powerful combinations. And what this really talks to is the interaction effect between two competencies. So if you take a study, and this is a study on 103,000 leaders, so this is like taking what we did and really blowing it up. But we're looking at two competencies, building relationships and drives results. And if you were good at one, building relationships, but not good at the other, there's an 8% chance you'd be a great leader in the 90th percentile overall. If you were good at drives results, but not at building relationships, there's a 9% chance. And so either being really good at either one of those, it's not so powerful. Wonder if you are good at both. And all of a sudden you find this interaction effect that there's 82% of the best leaders that do both well. And what that helped us understand was one competency has an influence on the other, and there's this interaction effect between the two. That is a huge insight for most of the leaders that go through the development and how this interaction effect between competencies, it really is thrilling. Another thing, insight we have, insight 15, great leaders are not perceived as having any major weaknesses. And we've got a name for this. And we don't mean it in any kind of mean way, but we oftentimes call this the Steve Jobs effect.
That's right.
Jack, why do we do that?
Yeah, he is the poster child for a phenomenon that only happens 2% of the time, and that is that a person has very obvious great strengths, and then they also possess some glaring weaknesses. And I guess the point that we want to convey here is, it does happen on occasion, but it certainly isn't the norm. And it's very much as what made Steve Jobs succeed was that the number of his strengths completely swamped the glaring errors and flaws that he possessed. So as long as the balance is strongly in that direction, I guess it can work in 2% of the cases.
Yeah. But what we're illustrating here, and again, if leaders have a weakness, it doesn't seem to have a negative effect. But leaders with a fatal flaw, and a fatal flaw is a competency at the 10th percentile, our advice, if you have a fatal flaw, is fix it. And this really tells you why. Because if you don't have a fatal flaw, you'd expect to have this leader at the 64th percentile. With a fatal flaw, they're at the 38th percentile.
Yeah.
With two strengths, you'd expect them at the 72nd, and they're at the 47th. So that really does have a negative effect. And so we always have people look at their feedback, and it's about 30% of the cases where leaders have a fatal flaw. And our advice is you need to fix that. You need to get it out of the way because it's
dragging you down.
Yeah,
very
that's
much.
Exactly what it does, drags you down. Another insight, actually, Jack, I think this is the biggest contribution we made to the field. The insight is leadership attributes are often developed in non-obvious ways. And we'll use as an example here, inspires and motivates others. A lot of times I'll say to people, so what would you do if you wanted to be more inspiring? They'd say, well, just be more perky and positive, or pep talks or high fives, and that doesn't work. And so what does work? Well, we looked at thousands of leaders, and when we looked at those thousands of leaders, we said, if you were inspiring, were there some other behaviors that helped you to be inspiring? And so we found that making an emotional connection helped, establishing stretch goals, clear vision. These 10 behaviors were the way that leaders became more inspiring. And when we first discovered this, we were very excited because a lot of times people try to get better, but they don't know what to do.
Wow.
And especially when they're trying to build strengths because they're already good at it. And we talk about linear and nonlinear development here, but one of the things that we wanted to show you here was when people improve, and this is a study we did with 57 leaders, we showed leaders that made a significant improvement on inspires and motivates others. And what we found is that when they improved in inspiring, they also improved in the 10 companion behaviors. And so A influenced B, and we have some good evidence to show that improving the companion behaviors really causes a profound impact on improving the confidence.
And I think for our listeners here today, just the metaphor that helps people understand this the most, I think, is the metaphor around cross-training in athletics. That we know that great athletes who want to become a better tennis player may do lifting weights, they may swim, they may bike, or they may do long-distance running, because they've found that capacity really helps them be a better tennis player. So hence this discovery that if there is a competency you want to get better at, there are ways that you can behave and things that you can learn to do that are really proven to be highly correlated with success in doing that.
And if you have not seen our nonlinear development guide, it is a really insightful document, and it really is the core to our success in helping leaders improve. And speaking of that, I find a lot of people pessimistic about leaders being able to change. And so this is a study we did. This is 3,050 leaders. And what we found is that these people went through a pre-test where they did the 360 and then 18 to 24 months later did a post-test. And we're looking at the pre-test versus the post-test. And this is the people that improved. And we found that the majority of leaders did improve, but it's bare majority. It's about 51%. But those with fatal flaws, they started off at the 18th percentile, and they were able to move to the 46th percentile. And those who didn't have fatal flaws, their average effectiveness was the 55th percentile, and actually went into the top quartile, the 75th percentile, in terms of their effectiveness. That is evidence that this works.
It's a good news scenario, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
that people with fatal flaws can get better, and they make the biggest jump.
Yeah. Yeah.
The good news is that people who are pretty good already can continue to get better, and obviously the people with fatal flaws, even the good ones, ended up being about the median, or the mean, whereas the people who are working on their strengths really do jump up to that top quartile.
Top quartile, and you can move from good to great.
Yep.
And by the way, what's the impact of that? Well,
Back to the slides on productivity,
yeah, and all those
sales
other things.
performance, everything.
And this shows the engagement scores from pre to post. Again, in the pre-test, leaders were at the 34th. They moved to those with fatal flaws to the 50th, and those building strength were the 52nd, moved into 62nd. So as leadership improved, so did engagement go up, and that's exactly what we'd expect. Insight 21, leaders must take responsibility for their own development. And what we're showing you here is 2 questions, asking for and acting on feedback, and the correlation between that and overall leadership effectiveness. Now, Jack, when you look at this graph, what does it tell you?
What it tells me is, and what it reminds me of, is the fact that you often hear in organizations people complaining about the fact that they don't get enough feedback. But if people want feedback, probably the most powerful way to get it is to ask for it. And this is showing the dramatic effect of the manager who asks for feedback about her or his performance, and then also then takes action on it. But what a perfect correlation it is with overall effectiveness and the overall outcomes, just overall leadership effectiveness.
Well, the other great insight you had about that is when you ask, you're in a much better attitude to do something about it because you ask,
Yeah,
as opposed to people said, "Hey,
telling you
what
gratuitously."
You did
Yeah, that's right.
The next insight: organizations are waiting far too long to begin developing leaders. And Jack, you've talked a lot about this. You want to talk about this particular slide?
I would love to. So when I first entered the business world, the IBM company had an interesting tradition, and that was the day that you were promoted to be a supervisor, they signed you up for an immediate course on how to become a better middle manager, better first-line supervisor. And that practice of giving people development early on so that they enter their new role with some good ideas and good background, that's kind of been lost. What we see is that if you survey companies and ask them what's the average age that a typical supervisor is promoted to his or her position, it's around 27, 28 years of age. What we've seen with our data of late is that, what was it, a few years ago, Joe, this was 42.
Right, yeah.
And now it's jumped to 46. That's the average age.
We thought it'd go down.
We thought it would go down. The average age of the person going through one of our development programs, which, best we can tell, is the first formal development that they have received. It's not true in every case, obviously, but in the main. So just think about that. Average age of being promoted to supervisor, 27. Average age of receiving this formal development effort, 46. There's just a lot of years that people have been working with virtually no formal development practices. And there are people who would argue, well, you learn to be a manager by being a manager. But we aren't going to show this slide, but we've learned that that's not true, that simply being in the saddle for a long time doesn't make you a good manager. If anything, your scores go down a little bit.
They do. And this is a great time for people to learn and to grow. And again, you're not really putting those years to work where people could be developing skills that take a long time to learn, but they're not learning.
Well, in all the years that the organization would have benefited from having a better trained supervisor. That's the other downside to it.
And this adds some fuel to that fire, because a lot of times what we hear from some organizations is, hey, all you need to have a really good organization is a few great leaders at the top. Well, what we started to look at here was we looked at 4 levels of management. We looked at top management, senior management, middle management, supervisors. What's wrong with that idea is if you have a few great leaders at the top, then they're great and you have high engagement from their direct reports. But if the supervisors are terrible leaders, then you have low levels of engagement. And so what this is showing you is that leaders at every level have impact on their direct reports.
And furthermore, that the supervisors have by far the greater bulk, the biggest numbers, people reporting to them. So
They do.
this is showing employee engagement scores compared to overall leadership effectiveness. And boy, that tells a very powerful story about leadership needing to be done at all levels.
Another thing that we noticed in our data is that, that there's a lot of similarity between levels in the organization. And what we found is we asked people how important a particular competency is at a particular level. Now, we do find that some competencies are more important at one level than another. But as you see here, for instance, solving problems is less important for senior leaders, and collaboration is less important along with taking initiative. But strategic perspective for top management is very important, and it's more important for senior leaders. And for supervisors, honesty and integrity is more important. But what's interesting is you see all across the board the importance rankings are fairly large on almost all the competencies at every level. And so as you move up, some become more important and some become less important. This next study is about leadership effectiveness in an organization seldom exceeds that of the group at the top. And we did a study with, this is 11,000 people, 7 different organizations, and we classified the top, middle, and lower levels of the leadership. And then we looked at the trend line there, and we found that top leaders' average effectiveness was 73rd percentile, middle at the 58th, and bottom at the 44th. And then we got in a new organization, Organization 8. And when we assessed their top leaders, they weren't at the 73rd on average. Their average was about the 58th. And so I always ask groups, well, where do you think the middle level is going to go? And is it going to go level, or no, it's going to go down? And what we found is leadership sort of flows downhill. And this idea that really there is some logic to giving a little more training and development to those top leaders, give them a little more coaching, because if you can pull that up, it pulls the next level up. And so leadership flows downhill. The next insight was one key to effective development is the support of the immediate manager. And I was with a group recently, and the senior leader asked a really good question. He says, well, okay, how do we keep everybody set a goal? And he says, so what do we need to do to make sure, or to make this go, to increase the effectiveness of the goals here? And I had one response: have everyone share their goals with you. And he says, well, that's a lot of work. I trust these people. They're mature. They don't really need to do that. But our data was so clear, and this is the data, that if a manager will support the development of their direct reports, that the percentage of people that improve goes way up.
And let's be clear about what we mean by support. So support means a lot of things. It means that the manager is interested, that when this person goes off to any kind of development, that he or she goes with a clear signal about what are you hoping this person will get, that's got your blessings, that you want to hear about it when they come back, that they will schedule periodic coaching sessions with you to talk about how you're implementing it. That just in a whole variety of ways, they will really be actively involved in keeping track of your progress and what you've done with what you learned.
I've been in groups where I had a person come in and say, well, my manager's really mad at me for coming today to the session.
Right.
So talk about lack of support.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's, it's like, hey, your job is more important than your development. And so that's support when people do that. Here's a fun insight for Jack and I.
Right.
Women are generally better leaders than men. And we found that's Insight 31 in our book. And when we looked at our global data, we found that in our overall data set, and this is based on about 20,000 women, about 44,000 men, average effectiveness of men were at the 49.8 percentile. Women were at the 53rd.1 percentile. That's actually, since it's such a large sample, statistically significant. Canada, big difference. Netherlands, U.S., if we just break out the U.S., it's 57 to 59. So we find that in the majority of our data, women actually score higher than men. But we do find in some countries it's about even. And then in some countries, women score less positively than men. Mm-hmm. And as you start to understand that and try to explain it, we don't think this is genetics. We think this is a lot about opportunities to develop and about being sponsored and giving coaching. And we just think that's less likely in some of these countries like Japan, India, and Mexico. So hopefully that'll change in the future. As we looked at the competencies that women tended to be better at, a lot of people had a theory that women would be better at the nurturing competencies, things like building relationships, developing others. Those are nurturing competencies. Well, they were better at those, but the ones they were even more significantly better were competencies like taking initiative, practicing self-development, and driving for results. We do need to mention that men were actually rated better on two competencies, strategic perspective and technical professional expertise. So that's really interesting data. We'd invite you. We've written several articles on this, and it's fascinating to see that. Insight 32, effective leadership requires measurement. We have had lots of fun looking at high potentials, and typically high potentials are selected by a group decision where a limited number of people. What is it? The top 5% is what generally people are looking at, Jack?
Normally, a high potential would be defined as being in that top 5% of our entire population.
So when you were thinking about high potentials, you'd say, well, they should be at the top quartile, right?
Certainly ought to be in the top quartile.
But we did a very nasty thing. We actually measured their effectiveness using our 360 assessments. And what we found is 12% of those who are high potentials were in the bottom quartile, which is really an obvious miss. And in fact, 30% in the second quartile. That's hey, everything there is a miss except for the 22% that were actually in the top quartile. And so we do find that there's great validity in the predictive power of the 360. In fact, in a study we did with 359 senior leaders, we actually looked at potential ratings of those leaders. We had a personality test, and the correlations to that were about 0.14. We had a climate survey. It actually correlated a little better than the personality test. But the 360 assessments, the correlation to the potential ratings were 0.51. We find it's an excellent predictor of who is the most effective leaders. And it really does, for me personally, it really does give me that GPS kind of signal of you are here. and I think I know where I am, but it's like my eyes are closed. That 360 really lets me know where I really am. Well, this has been fun.
Been fun.
We'd love your feedback. We have a little survey that follows this. The survey comes with a gift. We're giving away some free books. And we also have an ebook on these insights that you can download. There should be a link that automatically comes up. If it doesn't come up, you can go to this link, bit.ly/ZF-March2020, and that survey will come up, and that'll give you an opportunity, if you do that survey, to register for a free book. We've got a bunch of these sitting here waiting in our hot little hands for you to give away. We also want to remind you about the value of our 360 feedback experience. We find this is the best way to develop. Jack and I just did our 360s and got some good feedback. We're glad we did it. And it's a way for you to get an insight into how you're doing as a leader, but it's also gives you some insight into potential and what you can do to get better. Our development process helps you to really build strengths, which we know is going to make a big difference. So, 3 last conclusions. Conclusion number 1, better leaders, better results. That's why we do this. We do this because we think there's a significant positive impact from having better leaders in your organization. We firmly believe that leaders are made, and the interesting thing is you can make them better, but if you don't develop them, they just they actually go downhill. That's the discouraging thing, isn't it? Yeah. When we looked at leadership and age, it doesn't go up. It goes down. You'd think it'd go up because of experience, but it goes down. Poor leaders can become good leaders, and good leaders can become great leaders. And again, the multi-rater feedback is the best available tool to help leaders develop. Any final comments, Jack?
I would just say amen to those. That absolutely. I think the wonderful news is that leaders are made, and no matter how good you are, you can be better. And I think that was Jack Welch, the famed CEO of General Electric, who was known as such a great leader in industry. One of his strong beliefs was that no matter how good you are, you can be better. And he insisted that all of the people that reported to him have their own personal development plan. And that's an important message.
That is. All right. Complete that survey. Get a free book. Let us know if you have any questions. Love to talk to you if you want to chat with us personally. Bye.